15. Oh, beautiful. Great. So are these being recorded? Yeah, good. All right. So, hi. I'm going to talk about RQI research and careers in Australia. I'm assuming that everyone knows that RQI stands for Relativistic Quantum Information. So my research is funded through largely through the Australian Research Council, Centre for Quantum Computation and Communication Technology. I also have an Australian Research Council Future Fellowship that will start next year. International Society of Relativistic Quantum Information is an important initialism you should know, so check out their website. My research group is called Qurmit, Q-U-R-M-I-T. You can find it at qurmit.org. And I work at RMIT University, which is in Australia. RMIT used to be an acronym or an initialism. It no longer is. They just call it RMIT University. All right, so first of all, who is this guy? Well, so I'm a professor at RMIT. I was born in Albuquerque into an Italian-American family. We have ravioli for Christmas, homemade ravioli. That's our standard Christmas meal. I was 25 before I realized this was not the standard American Christmas meal. I got my bachelor's degree in physics from the University of New Mexico, my hometown, 2002, and I got my PhD in theoretical physics from Princeton in 2008, although I spent 3 years of that time in Brisbane at UQ, working with Michael Nielsen and Jared Milburn. So I got to know the Australian system pretty early. I became an Australian citizen in May 2016, and yes, you can keep your U.S. citizenship when you become an Australian. I don't know why people think you can't, but you can. So my career, I think this is important to understand, I had a lot of research fellowships. So I probably should have put there that I had research fellowships for my PhD research. That was an important component of it. And then I was a postdoctoral fellow at Peru Institute for Theoretical Physics, which is in Waterloo, for 3 years. And then I was awarded a university postdoctoral fellowship from the University of Sydney. In fact, I was awarded a couple. I took that one. I know that ruffled some feathers. I'm sorry, guys. For 1 year of 3, and then I relinquished that one to take up an Australian Research Council fellowship, same place, in 2012. So I was at USyd for 4 years, 1 year on the Research Fellowship from the Union and 1 from the Australian Government, and then I got a fellowship from RMIT, which came with a continuing position, and then I was promoted to Associate Professor in 2020, and then to Professor at the beginning of this year. And starting next year, I've been a Future Fellowship. So I have had a lot of opportunities to do research, but I've also been involved in teaching and outreach and a bunch of other things. So how is this of useful to you? How is this of use to you? Well, before I say that, I will talk about, I've always had 2 research streams. So I've always had a research stream in quantum computing theory, quantum information theory, it involves quantum optics, and relativistic quantum information theory. So fundamental physics, of interest to quantum and emerging quantum and relativity, sometimes just relativity, sometimes just quantum field theory, but that has relativity in it. So I've always had a more practical stream and a fundamental stream, and I think those 2 have actually helped my career quite a bit. So research career tips. So let's just start with this. So what helped me? I think looking back, I can say that obviously talent is a privilege. I'm not going to lie about that. I do have a gift for mathematics. I think most people who are doing theoretical physics have a gift for mathematics. You can do theoretical physics without exceptional mathematical skills, but you do need very good mathematical skills. And I think, though, from what I've seen in supervising students, there is a wider skill level variation than I expected that could lead to very positive outcomes. So you don't have to be the top performer to be a very good academic. In fact, sometimes that can get in the way. When you have, when you are as long as you meet some threshold of performance, it's the other things that matter. So the other things on this list. Now, privileges you often can't do anything about. I had privileges growing up because my mother worked as a teacher she was teaching computing at my primary school, and so she had access to technology in the 80s that very few other kids had access to. My dad worked as an engineer at Sandia National Labs, so he got to bring home what he thought would let us get on the internet in, say, 1996. which is way before it was available. I had opportunities at the University of New Mexico to work there, to volunteer there. So I got into technology very early, and I got into mathematics and learning about computers and all these things that stimulated the analytical side of my brain very early. I also have the race and gender privilege, or maybe I should say that's not really a privilege, that's more just like how it should be for everyone. I don't have the impediments that some other people have. But those are the starting point. The rest actually make a huge difference, and these are things that you can control. So one of them is just grit. It's just continuing through. When you face setbacks, you keep going, you work hard, you try to do the best you can and avoid discouragement. If you find yourself getting discouraged, you get help, you get assistance. Strategic decisions were very important. Thinking a few years ahead. So not just thinking, what am I going to do next? And not just thinking, whatever, it'll be fine. Thinking, what do I need to do in the next 12 months to position myself for the next 3 to 5 years? That doesn't mean that you know exactly what you're going to do in 3 to 5 years, let alone 10 or 20. But it's saying, what do I need to have done by the end of the year in order to be in a good position to have options? So it's thinking a couple years ahead and giving yourself options going forward. Professional relationships, these were incredibly important in my career, and I recommend that all of you watching and listening try to build and maintain good professional relationships. You don't need to be super popular with absolutely everyone, but what you do need to have is a few people in a variety of places, and if you can, in a variety of areas that you work well with and that you maintain those connections. Again, you don't have to go to great lengths to do this. Just travel around, meet people, talk to people about your research. Have a short little stump speech that you can say. Talk briefly and clearly about your research. Get people interested. Be willing to work with whoever you can. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that you're better off holding a result to yourself because you might get scooped. It's almost always better to be open about your research with people that you trust or that your supervisor and mentors trust. International mobility. This was a help. I know that not everyone can do this, but if you're in Australia, going overseas, seeing how the rest of the world does quantum physics is very important. Coming back, it definitely helps having done that. If you are overseas, go to a few places, and then if you want to settle in Australia, then do that. Mentorship, extremely important. Find a good mentor. If you don't have a good mentor, get one. Because I had excellent mentorship from Michael Nielsen, and he would meet with me every couple weeks. This was after he had decided to go to Perimeter Institute. I switched primary supervisors, and I was working with Jared Milburn. But Michael stuck around, and he would guide me through, and he'd say, "Okay, what's interesting about your paper? What did you do in that paper?" And I would get intimidated by it, but then he would say, "No, just tell me," and that was really useful. Because he put things in context, and he taught me about this year by year plan. Breadth of expertise, practical and fundamental. You don't have to do both, but it does help to be able to say, okay, I'm doing this fundamental work. What are possible practical outcomes of this later on? You don't have to say that right away. If you're working on black hole physics, fine. That's very fundamental. But if you can say, look, we've never really tested quantum physics in curved spacetime. No one has done an experiment, really, to test these features. We know relativity, we know how curvature works, but we haven't done quantum-limited experiments with relativity. So this has practical implications for, say, quantum communication with satellites. That has done some of my colleagues a world of help with their applications in Australia, which I'll get to later. And fellowships and awards have been important. I got some advice from a more junior career person, and she had this great advice that she was given that said apply for basically one award every year, at least. And you should do that. Just search. It doesn't have to be big, but it goes on your CV and it builds up. So specific tips for your career: expand your expertise. Think and act strategically. I mentioned this. Travel as much as you can. If you can't, that's okay, but visit do conferences online. Invite people to visit you. Try to make connections and form and preserve those professional relationships. Those are key. Okay, so why Australia? Well, I would say that Australia is a great place to live and work. We have an excellent climate here, for the most part, unlike, say, Canada. But some people like the cold, that's okay. But we do. We have an excellent climate in the major cities. It's a safe place. We have a lot. I mean, I can, not just me, but people can walk around and feel safe in most neighborhoods in Australia even after dark. The compensation is great. I'll talk about that later. The culture, I think, is quite good. People are largely friendly. People are largely happy. The minimum wage is good. We have enough socialized medicine. I mean, it's like most other modern Western countries. Not all, but our antagonism is low, I would say. I would say that the Australian culture is quite good right now. Anyway. And the quantum research funding is excellent, especially on the technology side. So I'll talk about how that will work with RQI in a minute. So let's talk about RQI research in Australia. So first thing you need to know about Australian research is what the Australian unis are. So we say uni for university. The group of 8 are considered the most prestigious universities. They are highly ranked for research, and they have largely an academic focus. Now, there are other focuses as well, and I'll get to that in a minute. But these are the 8 universities that are top ranked on the higher education rankings. They often get the most fellowships and grants. But that doesn't mean that they're the only ones. It just means that there's a large concentration of research excellence at these places. The culture, the teaching, these things can still vary. There are people that choose to come to RMIT because of the academic culture at RMIT, as opposed to, say, University of Melbourne up the road. I don't mean to call them out. There's plenty of people that like University of Melbourne and get a lot of benefit from that. RMIT has a more technical focus. And I will move on to that to talk about the Australian Technology Network, or the ATN. This is 6 universities that focus more on practical, industry, and impact-driven research. So while on the academic metrics, we at RMIT and these other universities are not as focused on beating those citation metrics and all of that, we are focused on connecting with industry, doing things of practical importance, research contracts, having impact. So impact is beyond academia. It's not just what kind of citations are you getting. It's what are you doing outside of the academy. So this could be in helping startups. It could be in helping businesses. It could be in having an impact on government policy. And this is where the focus is for these universities, and they do quite a good job at it. At least we do, anyway. So RQI research in Australia, these are the ones that are listed on isrqi.net. We have the University of Queensland in Brisbane, we have RMIT, and we have Macquarie. So I'm person at RMIT. In Brisbane, there's Jared Melbourne and Tim Ralph. And here in Sydney, at Macquarie University, there's Danny Turnow, Gavin and Brandon, both of whom are here today. However, it's very important to understand that there is research in adjacent fields like quantum field theory, particle physics, gravity. There's a lot of fundamental research in these areas and quantum computing, quantum information happening at other universities too. I didn't want to list them because it would be way too long. But these are the ones that have declared RQI groups. So something you need to know about the Australian educational system. So if anybody is or knows someone who is thinking about going from undergrad to PhD, you need to know how the Australian educational system works, especially if you want to come here. So basically it works like this. The undergrad degrees are usually, not always, but usually 3 years. Now this is atypical compared to, say, the North American system, where it's usually 4 years. The undergraduate degree is 3 years. And then, if you want to continue on, most students will do honors, which is 1 year. I'll talk about this in a moment. But another path is a master's by research. That's 2 years. If you have either of those, you need a degree with research experience embedded. You need to have written some sort of thesis in order to be eligible for a PhD at an Australian institution. And PhDs in Australia are 3 to 4 years. They're nominally 3 years. Most students take around 3.5. Some students can take up to 4. The undergraduate degrees are very fast, only 3 years, and students specialize immediately. So you don't get to, like in the American system, where you apply to a university and then you decide which college within there you want to go to. You can mess around for a couple years. It's a very broad education. Most Australian undergraduate degrees are fast and they're specialized from the beginning. Honors is a separate degree. It's 1 year, and it includes coursework, plus a research project, plus writing a thesis, all in 1 year. It's quite intense. Master's by research is 2 years. It has some courses, usually, and there's a research project and a thesis. It's a longer thesis than the honors. You're not necessarily expected to. It's somewhere in between. The requirements for these theses are they increase. So this one is just some small project that you write up. This needs to be a good body of work that either summarizes the topic. Maybe it's a small new research project. PhD has to have significant new research components. In the PhD, it is also very fast by international standards. It's 3 to 4 years. Minimal coursework. Again, you specialize immediately. There's a research project plus a thesis, sometimes called a dissertation elsewhere. And there's external assessment. There's often no defense, with some exceptions by the university. No viva, sometimes it's called. Some unis are starting that, though. So undergraduate and honors, funding and scholarships. Undergraduate and honors are Aussie students, so domestic students we call them, are supported by government loans that are repaid slowly and only after a salary threshold is met. So this is kind of nice if you're an Australian student. Unlike the American system where your student loans are due like within 1 year of finishing your degree, and you have to start paying them off regardless. You only have to start paying your HECS debt once the salary threshold is met. HECS is an acronym. That just means student loans. International students have to pay fees, tuition, and these are often quite steep. Masters by research and PhD, these are often called higher degree by research, or HDR. You'll see that acronym sometimes. These are they have government and research funded scholarships available. It's about $30K per year. So the Australian dollar is currently kind of weak. It's about 2/3 of an American dollar. I think it's comparable to the Canadian, maybe a little bit less. But that varies over time. International students have fewer scholarship opportunities and more limitations due to their visa conditions, but their fees are often waived. So international students can come in on very specialized scholarships, and it's very high-performing international students, and they get a very good education. There's a number of very good international students that have done well here. Australian academic careers. So, first of all, you need to understand how Australian unis are funded. Now, I'll tell you why that's important when we get down here. Australian universities are non-profit institutions that are partially funded by the Australian federal government. Government block grant funding, which is what I'm talking about here, is determined by the research and educational metrics. So, number of students that complete their degrees on time, research income. I don't know if it's directly publications, but I mean, there's a lot of things. Sorry?
Used to be.
Used to be, okay. So there's a lot of things that go into this formula, and it changes depending on the government. But that's basically how it is. Students pay fees or tuition that varies by the degree program. Domestic student fees are limited by law, and student loans are automatic for domestic students. International student fees are unlimited by law. They're just set by the university, and they can be quite high. This is a major source of university income to a lot of the universities in Australia. And this was a crisis during COVID because the borders were closed, and that meant that we had a lot of layoffs. There was a right-wing government at the time, and it decided not to support the universities at all. It supported some other businesses. I'm kind of bitter about it. But they decided not to support the universities, and so all universities in Australia were struggling. Most of them had significant layoffs, and we're still recovering from it, although we're coming out of it now. Government funding has been steadily decreasing in recent decades. This is a problem. And it means that Australian unis are acting like pseudo-businesses. So they're more focused on patents, not more. More than they used to be, not more than education. They're still focused on education and research, but there's a big pitch now, especially at the non-group of 8 unis, to focus on patents, IP, contract research, and maybe even spin-offs. So this is the thing. This is another way that universities can get income. So this is kind of how you have to think about what's going on in Australia, and especially with something like RQI, which is very fundamental. It helps to frame it in this context. But I'll get to that in a moment. University positions are either continuing or fixed term. There's no formal tenure, and there's no such thing as tenure track in Australia. So just don't ask about those positions. They don't exist. But what we do have is significant protections of academic freedom and protections from firing and good conditions from the National Tertiary Education Union. Oh, my virus definitions are updated. How nice. That was supposed to be off, but whatever. The NTEU, Enterprise Bargain. So join the union if you work here. There's no formal distinction between postdoc and professor. So what this means is that it still is very hard to fire people. It's just easier than in North America. There's no formal distinction between postdoc and professor. This is a huge benefit because if you arrive on a postdoc contract, you can still supervise students. You can say on your CV, I have a PhD completion. I've supervised a student. This has helped me out quite a bit on my research fellowships. So this is important. What's going on? So there's a bunch of different types of academic positions. There's casual academic. You get an hourly wage. It's very good. It's $50 plus per hour, depending on what you are doing. A variety of activities, but it's a precarious. It's not. There's no job security there. Postdoc works on someone else's grant. It's usually fixed term, 1 to 3 years usually. A research fellowship, you propose and lead your own research. This is often fixed term with some caveats. Then there's teaching and research positions, which are usually continuing positions. Continuing just means no end date, with the strong but not ultra strong like tenure protections of the enterprise bargaining agreement. Other uncommon are teaching focused positions and teaching fellowships. They do exist, but they're uncommon. So this I think is important, and this is one of the big benefits. Just have a look at the base salary here. So also these numbers, you get to add an additional 17% that goes directly into your retirement account, which is called superannuation. This is a major, major draw for Australian academics to move to Australia, because these positions are great. Postdoc salaries in North America and in Europe are often shit. But here, you're on the standard level. Also of interest is that your personal title gets updated when you reach level D or level E. In other places, professor is just a job title. Here it's a job title, yes, that's a position title. And then there's an equivalent for research only. But professor and associate professor also replace doctor as your personal title in Australia. I was very surprised when I learned that. But it is true. So when in doubt, call someone professor, not doctor. Level A through E are the standard levels. Goes from 74 up to 201K. These are the RMIT numbers. They'll vary by university and by location. Sydney, salaries are often a little bit higher. Cost of living is higher. But there you go. So most postdocs are hired at A or B. The mid-career is usually, and the mid-career fellowships and things are usually level C. A lot of teaching and research academics start at level B or C and then work their way up through promotion. So RQI research careers in Australia. So I'm nearly done. I think I'm going to be reasonably on time. So for postdocs, remember these are working on someone else's grant, not your own. You need to start searching 12 months in advance. Now, if you have an end date of your current contract or position less than 12 months, that's okay. You'll still find something. But if you really want to maximize your opportunities, you really need to start searching early. Again, don't freak out if it's less than this. Just hustle. Set alerts at seek.com.au. That's the standard site for jobs. You can and make it broad, not just quantum. Definitely not relativistic quantum information. Make it broad. Make it fellowship. Make it physics. Make these OR alerts, and then you'll get an email every couple days, and just look through them and see what you have. Put in the cities that you want to live in: Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, Perth, Hobart, whatever you want. And other RQI or quantum-specific sites. You'll have to do your own research on that. Email the academic who has the grant. It's usually listed in the position description. Also, use your contacts. So if your supervisor knows someone, tell your supervisor, tell everyone you meet that you're looking for a position. Tell everyone you meet that you want a job. Anyone who might have possible job opportunities, ask them directly. And say, look, I'm looking for a job. Don't be shy. If you want a job, go find one. Talk to people. Be persistent with academics. We often don't reply to emails. This is not personal. This is just failure to be organized. And apply directly with the university. University fellowships sometimes exist. You need to check with the individual universities. It varies over time. Some of the university fellowships that I've seen before no longer exist. Other ones have replaced them. So I'm not going to list them here. Start searching 2 years in advance for these, because these are often 1 year intake. Once a year intake, they need a lot of preparation in the application, and you need a university sponsor, so reach out early. Find someone who will say, yes, we would like to have you join our research team as an independent research leader. 1 second, let's set another timer. Almost done. Yeah, 5 minutes. Consider the university strategy. This is really important. Get help from someone locally for how to do that. I'll say more about that on the last slide. So ARC fellowships are prestigious. They're a way that a lot of people move up in their careers, and a lot of the way that people get embedded into the Australian system. So I started with a university fellowship, then I got an ARC fellowship. The Australian Research Council is the primary scientific funding agency. It's like the National Science Foundation in the US or NSERC in Canada, or the ERC, I guess, in Europe. Start searching 2 years in advance. 2 years. Start planning 2 years ahead of time. So if your contract is 2 years, start searching now. Tell people, not searching specifically, I shouldn't have said searching, but tell people, I want a grant, I want to get a fellowship. What do I need to do now? Because there are things that you need to do in terms of writing papers, making contacts to set yourself up for that. Do visits of the places that you want to be, and start getting that going early. There's DECRAs, Future Fellowship, and Laureate Fellowship. I'll talk about that in a second. So the DECRA is the Discovery Early Career Research Award. I put the word fellowship on the end of it. They don't call it that, but whatever. It's from 0 to 5 years from the formal date of your PhD. So actually having a later PhD grant date can be good. You have up to 2 attempts depending on your citizenship. They change this all the time. If you're Australian, you usually get more. Maybe you get one more attempt than other people. It's 3 years fixed term plus research funding. You need a university sponsor, so reach out early. The Future Fellowship is similar to the DECRA, but it's 5 to 15 years. There's 3 different levels depending on where you are. I recently got one at level 3. I'm at 15 years now. You have up to 3 attempts. It was my last attempt, both in terms of time and the third. So I had 2 failures before I actually got it. And there's lots of really good people that don't get one. And I know them personally. It's 4 years fixed term plus research funding, and you often get a continuing teaching and research position that you negotiate before you apply for the fellowship. You need a university sponsor. Reach out early. Laureate fellowships are for more senior people, 15 plus years. They're highly competitive, top-performing senior academics from around the world. You have to fit extremely well with the university and Australian strategic priorities, and significant support from the university is expected. So I think I was done. Last slide. So tips for these fellowships and really getting yourself embedded in the Australian system. Start searching early. Tell everyone you know, I want to move to Australia, I want to get a fellowship, I want to do some research there. What do you think? How can I make that work? Visit and make connections years before applying, as early as you can. So go visit other institutions, use your supervisor's money, tack on a visit after a conference. Even a day or 2 is good. And try to make actual connections. Oh, here it is. Embed yourself within the research happening at the university via external collaboration. Say, hey, I'd like to help with this project. Don't just work on your own shit. Say, what are you working on? What can I help with? I'd really like to get involved with what you're doing. Get to know the strategy of the institution. Is it Group of 8? Is it ATN? Is it other? But find out what it is. You have to talk to people there. Get to know the Australian government priorities. So this is important. It's a bit tricky for RQI, but much of RQI can be said to benefit satellite-based quantum communication, like I said. Mention this as a long-term benefit of the basic science. Don't stress this too much because it looks like you're bullshitting, but make it clear what the technological priorities are. Consider social priorities as well. I got a grant based on saying people care about fundamental discoveries in physics, and that's a social benefit to Australia. And position yourself as more than just a researcher. If you have industry connections, that's good. If you've done teaching, that's good. If you've done outreach, supervision, etc. And that's all I have now. If you have more questions, you can email me. I should put my email, but it's my name, nicholas.menicucci@rmit.edu.8. Thank you.
All right. That was nice. Just one thing to add, maybe about applying for grants in Australia. They're ridiculously long, and you're going to get extremely frustrated.
Yeah.
And you're going to realize it's a waste of time, and it is. It's a waste of your
changing for good one.
It's a waste of your valuable time, but you can redo it. So if you don't get it,
that's true.
And you think it's good, and you've gotten good feedback, do not be shy about applying and just submitting almost the exact same thing next year.
I think that's a really good point.
You'll be amazed at how often that works.
Yeah. And I reused my university fellowship application for my DECRA. I had to put a lot more into it, but yeah, you can do that.
Yeah.
And I had some failures before I succeeded. Yeah, definitely agree with that. Any other questions? No, we don't have a lot of time.
Okay, so
That's it. Thanks.
thanks, Nick. Now that was our last morning talk. So now until 1:30, we're on lunch break.